And when I got to law school, everybody there is to change the world. It's really funny because prestige, at least from the peers I had at Harvard, it wasn't really about money or like status. It was like, are you going to change the world or are you not? And it was just very social justice oriented. And that was when I first was introduced to this concept called being an abolitionist and abolitionism. And the question that seeds that whole conversation, the way I understand it, is, if we're starting from scratch, what kind of system would we create? And by the time I finished at Harvard, I realized that for me, being an abolitionist is a heart practice. It's opening this. Like, if the heart is open, then we can connect. And if we can connect and we can empathize, we're not going to be able to treat people the way that we have been. We're not going to be able to exist in this system anymore. We're going to need to create a system that's based off of compassion.
Welcome to The Way of the Heart. Today's conversation is with Camille Edwards. She's someone that has been working on integrating her heart and her mind. She's a Harvard Law School graduate, and she's also a facilitator of practices like Cacao Ceremony, meditation, Herbalism, and Somatic movement. She's sharing with us today how she's been doing this and sharing all of her expertise in all of these modalities. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Camille, welcome to The Way of the Heart.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I'm so happy to have you. I feel like I have to share that we met through Instagram, which is very interesting to me because for a long time I had a very conflicting relationship with Instagram. And for the past year, I've been trying to change that concept that I have of Instagram and changing my relationship and how I approached it. And it has given me so many beautiful gifts. And I have one of them in front of me today, well, through the camera. I think, connecting with people in a way that you feel like there's resonance and that there's something that you can't explain, but you feel like, you should meet, has been something that I have been actively doing on Instagram, and that happened with you. So I'm so happy to have you.
Yeah, I know. I feel the same way. And the best thing is when you connect with someone on Instagram. And then I was at this like medicine gathering a couple weeks ago, and I met in person 3 people that I had been following for years. And I was like, oh my gosh. And it was so cool to like connect all of the dots.
And it always feels like you know each other somehow.
Yeah.
But it's different to finally, like, even though we're not meeting in person, it's different to finally get to talk and really connect and, share our thoughts, our ideas, our hearts in a conversation.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. So I first felt really connected to you because, first of all, your Instagram handle, I believe, is Her Heart Practice. Is that what it is? Okay.
Yes.
I'm like, okay, I said it wrong. Okay, that's correct. And, the name of the podcast is The Way of the Heart. And when I went to your Instagram, I felt like there were so many things, that I resonated with: the connection with nature, the connection with meditation. And there was something specific that at some point I read that you mentioned, which is the integration of the heart and the mind, which to me, I feel like somehow this is kind of like my purpose, my mission. There's something there in that approach that I feel like I have some things to give. So I definitely want to talk to you about that in our conversation. But before we dive into that kind of topic, I would love to know more about you and your background. Where were you born? How was your childhood? Of course, if that is something that you feel like sharing. The things that have shaped Camille today.
So I grew up in Northern California, in a place called Marin. And it's filled with nature and trails and redwoods. And I think from a really early age, I just found nature to be such a beautiful medicine. And I wasn't seeing it as medicine, or like now we call it like forest therapy, and we have all these like beautiful ways of describing it. But for me, it was just like, yeah, of course, I feel better when I get to be connected with the earth. And my parents were very big advocates of that. And the town that I grew up in is predominantly white, and I was always my sister and I were always like two of the only mixed Black people. And so I think from an early age, there was this just awareness of difference. And I think when you're young, that doesn't feel great. Like you just want to fit with everyone around you. And so I think that just led me to be on a very like straight path to really be this like perfect expression, if that exists. And I was always very interested in justice, this concept of justice, and doing the right thing, or leaving the world a little bit better than when I came here. I was always focused on that. And to me, the most obvious way of doing that was to become a lawyer. Like the law and justice, it felt like this really perfect way to make change culturally and societally in a direction that felt more reflective of my values. And when I got to law school, everyone was so smart. I went to Harvard. Everybody was so smart, so visionary. Everybody there is to change the world. It's really funny because prestige, at least from the peers I had at Harvard, it wasn't really about money or like status. It was like, are you going to change the world or are you not? And it was just very social justice oriented. And that was when I first was introduced to this concept called being an abolitionist and abolitionism. And the way that we talked about it a lot was through the prison system and abolishing the prison system. But the question that seeds that whole conversation, the way I understand it, is, if we're starting from scratch, what kind of system would we create? Would we deal with harm the way that we've been dealing with harm? Would we deal with, health, mental health, the way that we have been? If we were starting now, would we imagine the same system that we've come up with? And I think for most of us, the answer is no. And so it was interesting because I got very curious about what it really means to imagine a new system and redefine the way that we connect with each other, with the environment, with everything. And by the time I finished at Harvard, I realized that for me, being an abolitionist is a heart practice. It's opening this. Like if the heart is open, then we can connect. And if we can connect and we can empathize, we're not going to be able to treat people the way that we have been. We're not going to be able to exist in this system anymore. We're going to need to create a system that's based off of compassion. And so it was just funny because I had this very, like you were talking about mind and heart integration, I had this very mental definition of what justice and what doing the right thing meant. But the more I kind of sat with it and worked with it, it dropped me into the heart space. And so now when I think of being an abolitionist, for me, it looks like holding ceremony. It looks like creating spaces where we can really feel, like deeply feel. And I think we can feel much more than we think we can. And it's through that feeling that we really get to find a new way of connecting with everything in our life, other people, the planet, our food, everything. It's all part of the heart being open. And so that's kind of what led me away from this mental version of justice into a more like heart embodied version. And then what led me to create Her Heart Practice.
Wow. The whole share, I was like, my heart was opening to hear. It's so interesting as well, because even what you shared about this idea when you were in Harvard, to think that from for the outsiders like me, you would think people are after money. You would think people are after, like the very generalized things that our culture has. And to think that an intention like, are you going to change the world, can also be kind of like a bump on the road to actually get away from the actual real intention. So to make it now that goal that creates a very linear path, which is not the heart, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the heart is this very non-linear way to approach life. It's so interesting to hear that. Like I'm gonna have to process that throughout the conversation and after, because I find it very, very fascinating. So today you are holding space and holding ceremonies in different ways. So herbs is one of them, right? Is that how you would
Mm-hmm.
call it?
Mm-hmm.
Plants, meditation, cacao ceremony is another one, and I maybe movement. I think that's the one
Mm-hmm.
that I'm missing. So how did you start integrating those in your life? When did that happen? Which one happened first? Tell me a little bit more about that.
That's a great question. So during the pandemic, Harvard was fully remote, and I moved to Hawaii. And that was when I had ceremonial cacao for the first time, because cacao actually grows in Hawaii. And a lot of people think, and I was on Maui, and a lot of people consider Maui to be the heart chakra of the world. So cacao is this heart chakra plant, Maui is the heart chakra of the world. It was a very heart opening chapter for me. And that was when I started to work with ceremonial cacao. And I was introduced to cacao by this wonderful soul who had spent a lot of time in Guatemala learning from a Mayan lineage about how to share cacao in a ceremonial way. And so I'm super grateful of how I was introduced to this plant, which is so much integrity and sensitivity to the culture. And I started to work with cacao on my own. I really started to have my own, hold my own space with it and develop my own relationship with the plant. And I think with any plant, there's two teachers. There's the culture that has protected and cultivated the plant, and then there's the plant itself. And at that point, I was really learning just from the plant itself and feeling how it was opening my heart, how it was getting me out of this mental state and into a more emotional state. And that was like almost 4 years ago now. And so I've been working with ceremonial cacao for almost 4 years. And then just in the past year, I started to share cacao in ceremony. And I went to Guatemala, and I'm planning to go back to Guatemala for kind of an indefinite amount of time to even further deepen my relationship with the plant. And that was when I really immersed myself in a training to really understand, like, how does this plant live? How do the Mayans relate to cacao? What's going on with this plant in the rainforest and in the tropical climate. And so for me to get to the comfort to be able to share cacao, I had to spend years developing my own relationship with her. And I'm really glad that I did it that way, because when I'm sharing cacao, it's really not about me. Like, and as any space holder, like, it's really not about me. It's about what does this plant want to share with this group of people? Like, what wants to come through? And I think the ability to facilitate that just takes time. It just takes time to really understand the nature of a particular plant, especially a plant like cacao, which is a heart chakra plant and has so much sacred resonance in Mayan culture. And as a facilitator, I'm just trying to share the medicine that works for me. And one of my favorite facilitators of cacao would always open every ceremony saying, we share the medicine that we need the most. And I share cacao, and he would say, I share cacao because my heart needs cacao. And that's definitely true for me. Like, this medicine has been so powerful for me, and learning how to feel deeply. And I want to create a space where we can do that in a community so that we can develop that empathy and that vulnerability together. And with other plants, it's the same thing. Sometimes it's more of a nervine, just like anti-anxiety, but pretty much always with any ceremony, it's like dropping the nervous system
Mhm.
to a lower state. I think we all spend a lot of time up here and in a very mental, anxious, focused beta brainwave state. And with ceremony, it's like if we can just slow things down, that's where the medicine can come through. And so, whether it's movement or herbalism or meditation, they're all just different tools to get us our nervous system down regulated. And then from that place, seeing what wants to come through.
What have you learned about the way in which Mayans used to use this medicine that maybe is interesting to you? I usually find fascinating those stories. Like, how did they
Mm.
use that? So, is there any story that you can share with us?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. I mean, I think what's really interesting is they didn't have cacao ceremonies. That's a very modern concept. They had cacao in ceremonies. I think the Mayan fire ceremony is probably the most common where cacao would be used. But the way we're using cacao now, where we sit around in a circle and drink cacao and share, that just didn't happen. To our knowledge, that just did not happen, which is really interesting. And I think it's a really interesting question as to like, what is a cacao ceremony? Should we even be calling it a cacao ceremony if that's not what Mayans did? The way I have reflected upon it is I'm not Mayan and I'm not trying to be Mayan or imitate, ceremonial Mayan tradition. So I don't hold Mayan fire ceremonies. That's not what I'm doing. And when I have a cacao ceremony, how I've come to peace with this is, cacao itself, we think was bred by two other plants. It was bred by humans. And when you look at the cacao pods, when they grow on the tree, it's really interesting because they grow on the trunk, which is really rare, instead of the branches. So they don't fall off. They actually have to be cut with something sharp to be able to harvest the cacao. And so humans play an integral role in the cultivation of this medicine, most likely even created the cacao plant itself. And so there's this conversation that's happening between the plant and humans. And the way that I see it is cacao ceremonies are happening now because our hearts are asking for them. And the evolution of humanity is dependent upon us opening our heart. And so that's why cacao ceremonies, particularly in the West, particularly in places where we live in such a mental state, are becoming so popular. And so, as long as we acknowledge that this is a living medicine that is evolving as our needs and our human hearts are evolving, I think it's okay to use it in this way, in a ceremonial way. I'm sure there's someone that would say it's not. But for me, it's in alignment with the plant and with what I see humans are in need of in order to change our way of being, to live more in harmony with the plant. Um, but cacao was used in so many different ways. It was used as a form of currency, not in the way of money, the way that we think of money as super transactional, but as like such a sacred and valued good that it would be a form of metric for other trade. And the trading itself in Mayan culture was a sacred act of trading cultural goods across lands. um, it wasn't capitalism the way that we, understand it now. Um, and cacao was also used as a medicine. They understood the heart properties of the plant. Many Mayan cultures viewed cacao as the divine mother, an embodiment of the divine mother. And so it's from so many, and there's the Mayas, there's all of these different subcultures within Mayan culture, but across them, there was just this understanding that this is a special plant, even if they were using it in different ways. And I think that just goes to show, the versatility of this plant and why people are so interested and drawn to cacao now, because it really does have such a breadth of magical and medicinal properties.
So, when we say that cacao is a heart plant, what does that mean? What is that actually
Yeah.
doing in the heart?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in herbalism, there's this thing called the doctrine of plant signatures. And basically what it means is that by understanding the physical properties of a plant, it can help you to understand um, the, medicinal, energetic properties of a plant. So physically with cacao, there's an alkaloid called theobromine. And what theobromine does is it literally sends energy into the cardiovascular system and into the heart. So when you drink cacao, you'll often feel this kind of burst of sensation in the heart and an expansion in the heart. And so we can see that happening physically in the body. And so it makes sense that if you're feeling this burst of energy going into your heart and opening up your heart chakra, there's also an emotional opening that's happening as well.
I love learning about, the nuances, and like, to me it's fascinating when someone knows so much about anything, and I can hear and feel the passion that you have for this. So the way that you specifically use cacao, do you use it similar to, I would say, how the Mayans used it, meaning it was not necessarily in ceremony? You do, I guess, facilitate ceremonies for someone else, for groups, but for you, are you, because I've seen that there's a lot of people that now use it on a daily basis. Is that how you're using it too?
It's such a great question. I do not drink cacao daily, partially because it's really affected by climate change right now. There's been huge shortages in cacao. A lot of the cacao forests are experiencing deforestation. The rains are shifting because of climate change. So I don't drink it daily. I do think, though, that the most important thing is about purchasing cacao from ethical sources. And if we are supporting and empowering the farmers who are producing cacao in a regenerative way that's protective of the rainforest, that's diversifying the plants in the forest and not just mass producing monocrop cacao farms, I do think that that is a way to support the healthy development of the plant. Also, I live in California right now. And so just energetically, if I'm living, in a different part of the country, I don't live in the tropical rainforest. I couldn't grow cacao where I am. My instinct is to, on a daily basis, work with the plants around me. So like oat straw is one of my favorite plants. It's a weed. It grows everywhere in California. I can literally harvest it myself. That's like a daily plant that I'm using. And then cacao is a plant that I work with more intentionally, ceremonially, when I really feel the call. Of course, there's seasons of life where I maybe am working with it more regularly because I'm working through something emotionally where I really need that support. But I see cacao as integrated in this larger web of plants. There's so many plants. There's so many incredible plants. And I think this is one of those things where like capitalism meets herbalism, and we have this tendency to kind of romanticize these like tropical plants that only grow in one region of the world and yada, yada, yada. And it's like, yes, those plants are amazing. Love cacao, love shilajit, love these like rare resin, minerals. And, we have so many plants around us. And I think it's really important to work with those daily and then use these other plants, as needed if we don't live in that environment. I think that just for me personally feels a lot more sustainable. So that's how my practice is. And I think that if there is a season of life where someone's drinking cacao more regularly, just having it be intentional. I'm not drinking cacao in a to-go cup, driving to work. That's just not how I'm drinking it. If I am in a chapter where I'm drinking cacao daily, I'm sitting, I'm in ceremony, I'm in intention, I'm present, I'm fully there with the plant. And so I think that the reality is that those of us who live in the West, we probably don't have the capacity to work with cacao in that way every day because we're doing a million other things. And that's totally fine. But then just when we do drink cacao, to create that space where we can really be fully in reverence and respect and presence, the way we would an elder if an elder were visiting us. I think that feels, in integrity. But again, everyone has their own relationship with the plants and their own journey with it. And I definitely don't want to have like a judgmental view on it. But for me, that's kind of how I practice working with cacao.
This makes me think of just in general the importance of ceremony. How do you see ceremony? Like how would you define ceremony, and why is it important for us to maybe crave a little time in our lives, even in this Western lifestyle, to create that space for ceremony?
I love this question. I just right now, what's coming through is ceremony is a space free of time. I think that when we're in a scheduled Western time reality, ceremony cannot come in. I was just reading, I don't know if you're familiar with Malidoma Patrice Somé. He's a West African shaman, and he has a book on ritual. And he was saying how in his tribe, they don't even have a word for time in his language. It doesn't exist. They just don't. They don't even refer to it because they're just living. They're just living every day in community, in ceremony, in ritual. And I think that creating time, carving out time where we're off time, where we're just fully present, we're connecting with the people around us, we're connecting with the earth, we're in meditation, whatever it is, whatever we feel called to, that's what I would consider ceremony, and then we can like dress it up and make it really beautiful and put themes and add other dimensions to it. But really what it is it's a space where we're not in time, we're not doing, we're just existing in our natural state. And I think that it's so, so, so important that we have ceremony. And it can be simple, it doesn't have to be a super elaborate 3-hour thing every single day. It can be as simple as taking 10 minutes to, meditate before we start our day, or to, water our plants can be a ceremony. Like it can be anything. But I think just creating a space that's a non-productive state where we're existing and connecting with something greater and something that brings us out of that mental plane is so healthy for our nervous system, but also for our spirit and developing into a more authentic and embodied version of ourselves.
How I am receiving what you share is basically coming into presence with ourselves, really connecting with ourselves. And I feel like, we hear a lot about the power of now, right? Just coming home, being present. And I think all of this is basically that ability that we have to disconnect from past and future, right? Like in the present moment, when we ground ourselves, when we bring our attention to our feet, connecting with the ground, to our breath, that in a way feels like there's no time. Time doesn't exist there. Mm-hmm. So I love the way in which you are describing ceremony, because in that sense, we could really bring ceremony to many moments of our day to day. And it really what matters is how we approach it. And I feel like it would be kind of like, it's impossible to think that with the way that we live our life, we can actually go into this other world, and to this other side of the spectrum in which we don't even have a word for time.
Yeah.
But I feel like knowing the spectrum, knowing what lies on each side really allows us to see what could be in the middle. What is the balance? What can we bring into harmony, right? I think that's what harmony is about. And harmony in a way is not even balance. It's like, how can I bring some of this? The proportion of that may be totally different, right? When I think of harmony, I think of like chefs. Because, if you add a lot of, I don't know, like bitterness to a meal, it may not be the greatest meal. But if you add just a little touch, just a little bit of, lime or whatever, it's amazing. The proportions are totally different, but it's harmonious. So I think that that in a way, the invitation to create harmony in our lives is an invitation to make space for ceremony, which I love. I mean, just like hearing you say that, I'm like, oh, okay. I love that perspective, that approach. So going back to the initial question. So in 2020, that's when you were presented and you were, gifted the opportunity to experience Cacao Ceremony. Were you in 2020? So you said you were studying or still, right? You were in Harvard. When did you graduate and when did you actually start working? How did that look for you and how were you balancing these two worlds?
Yeah, so I graduated from law school in 2021 and started working in the fall of 2021. And it was definitely challenging beginning to balance. I think in the first year of my life, or first year of my working life as a lawyer, it meant, every weekend I was getting outside, I was hiking, I was doing everything non-screen to kind of balance the being on a screen all day when I was at work and really filling up my cup outside of work with experiences that were nourishing for me. I don't like go out and party. I don't drink alcohol or anything. So I was using all my free time. Like my friends would gather, we would have community potlucks and we would have dinners and we would be outside. And all of my free time was super nourishing and fulfilling, which was really wonderful. And I was in a practice that was more corporate at that time. So I was representing a lot of companies and small businesses, entrepreneurs. And then I always felt this desire to be more at the intersection of law and something more creative. And so I made a switch to an entertainment law practice, which I really loved. Like I would represent producers and artists and creatives and people who were doing really awesome things and telling their authentic stories. And we would support them with that. And it was really fulfilling. And I had a vision of, representing people who are telling stories that are going to help us to open our hearts, seeing that creative expression as part of this picture to change the way that we are relating to each other. And just recently, I actually closed that chapter for now because I really want to focus fully on this heart practice and giving it my undivided attention. And I think that, back to the like mind heart integration, I think there will be an integration again at some point, and it will look really different than what I have been doing. But I got to a point where my heart was just so hungry for attention and intention that I felt that it would be best to just focus fully on this chapter. And so I don't have many plans, which I'm really excited about. I'm hosting a retreat at the end of July, which I'm excited about, a women's retreat, and potentially one at the end of the year. But other than that, I'm just kind of letting things unfold and seeing what wants to come through. So I'm really excited about that.
I can resonate a lot with what you're sharing. And something that came to me today, and I feel like this came to me because we were going to have this conversation. I'm learning about my intuition in other ways. Like I can see her, I'm going to say her. I can see her kind of like throwing things at me in a different way now. And it's been really interesting. I've always been like very visual. Like I see images and I'm like, oh, okay, I see that. But lately, it's been just like randomly, I will have like these internal dialogues of things that have happened to me, like almost like if I'm reflecting on things that have happened out of nowhere. And that happened this morning. And I think it's because we are having this conversation. I actually had no idea that you recently quit your practice. I actually just learned it like literally like 10 minutes before we jumped in the call. So now it's making sense why I was having this reflection. So this morning I was reflecting on the fact that when I decided to go all in the abyss of I have no plans, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I know my heart is pulling me towards something, I was actually enjoying what I was doing. So I created a company. I was doing it for 7 years, and I actually loved designing. I loved, working with colors. I loved working with paper. My company was, quote unquote, successful to what we believe is success, like financially stable and all of that. Yet there was a question that was planted in my heart that was, is this what you want? And it took me 2 years to fully come into peace with, I don't think so. And I feel like it was because I was actually enjoying many of the things that I was actually doing on a day to day. It was fulfilling in many different aspects. And I feel like my reflection this morning, and I am sharing this because I feel like maybe you can resonate with this, is that a lot of the stories that at least I heard of people that made these big changes in their life was coming from a place where their job was not fulfilling at all. They were not finding any joy. They were even in this place of like feeling miserable in some ways. But for me, I couldn't relate to that. So I think it was so hard to feel confident with that decision of like, you know what? Although in paper this looks great and there are actual things that are making me really happy on my day-to-day with what I'm doing, this is not it. Did you have that same experience? Because from what I hear, you were feeling like you felt fulfilled in many ways. Yet there was something that you were like,
Yeah. I think I was helping other people fulfill their vision. As a lawyer, I was supporting artists who were carrying out their gifts. And I want to carry out my gifts. And some people's gift is to help other people carry out their gifts. That is definitely a valid path. And for a lot of people, it is. And there was a part of that that was fulfilling. But I reached a point where I wanted to just give myself full attention on my passions and let those come through and not have it be like a side project that I do around my job. And I think that we're just at a time where we need more medicine women. However people want to define that. I define a medicine woman as someone who shares medicine with anyone open to receiving it. I think we all have that capacity. And I just think we're at a time where there's a reason why there's so many of us that are like, wait, there's something else. I think that, there's a shift. And I think that we're living in a time where opening the heart and integrating it with the mind is going to be the way forward. And so I'm definitely one pawn in that larger movement towards a more harmonious, hopefully, way of us existing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious about your relationship with women in general. Like, how has your relationship to women been throughout your life? And I guess I ask this because I grew up thinking, because I think this was a very logical thing, thinking that it was easier for me to relate to men than women. Although, looking back, I was always very close to women. And to this day, I'm still friends with all of my friends that I grew up with since we were like 5 years old.
I love that.
So there was something that was kind of like planted, in my intellect that made me think that it was easier for me to connect with men, which, of course, as an adult, made it a little bit more difficult to connect with women. And it's in recent years, really, that I've really been able to kind of like, delete that programming. And it's a day-to-day thing. I am pretty sure there are things that I'm still blindsided with. So that's why I'm curious.
Mm. I think that I have maybe the opposite, where like I've always been about women. Um, all of my closest friends, really until now, with a few exceptions, are women. Um, my mom and my grandmother are very strong women that, raised me and instilled just this independent, powerful, feminine energy. And then there's like the feminine. There's like women and then there's the feminine. And I think with women, I've always felt very comfortable and had close friendship and sisterhood. I think the feminine and that like soft, yin, slow, emotional rather than mental is something I've really grown into in the last few years. I think that I've been much more this way and direct and rational and linear and a much more like masculine form of strength and intelligence. And now I'm sort of balancing within myself. Like, yeah, there's a part of my masculine that's beautiful and it keeps me organized and grounded and centered. And then there's the like somatic flow feeling experience, um, which I'm like figuring out like what exactly is the balance. Like if there's a spectrum in every person, how does that balance for me? And it's a beautiful dance. Like I love being on that journey and kind of going back and forth and seeing how things, connect with each other. Um, but yeah, always been all about women.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, I feel like for me it was more of like an intellect kind of thing that I thought that's how I was, but the reality was showing me something different.
Interesting.
Because I was always very close to my friends, my
Mhm.
girlfriends. Um, I was thinking, you mentioned the word somatic, which really brought me to the practice of movement, which I know this is something that you also practice. How do you practice this specifically? And is it something that you facilitate? And anything that you can share about that?
Yeah. So for me, movement is part of my daily practice, ceremony, ritual, whatever you want to call it. I love yoga practice. I'm actually doing a yoga training in the fall, but I have my own practice that I do every single day that just really helps me to get back into the body. Um, and I love facilitating experiences for women to dance. I think that dancing has a cultural aspect of it where it can get like sexualized, and having a space where women can just dance and be in a safe container where we can move however we feel that we need to move and not have the gaze of men narrating that experience, I think is so liberating and so healing. And so when I hold retreats or workshops, I love to include a dance somatic experience because, like, how often do we get to just like move in a container of just women and not have men looking at us? It's like the best thing ever. So I love facilitating that. And also, like walking. You've probably seen this on my Instagram a million times. I'm constantly walking barefoot. Walking barefoot is amazing. It reduces inflammation up to 80% in the body. It calms down our nervous system. It connects us with the earth. It reduces anxiety. It has so many benefits, mental, physical, spiritual, etc. And I'm a huge advocate of that. Like I don't consider it exercise. I consider it like moving with the earth, and I walk really slow. And people are always like, "Oh my gosh, you're walking on this trail barefoot." And I'm like, "Yes, I just walk slow and I am not in a rush." It really gets you grounded. So, I think like yoga, dancing, and barefoot walking are three of my favorite somatic movement practices.
barefoot walking is definitely my thing too.
It's the best.
I struggle so much with like buying shoes because I'm like, why do I need to wear that?
It doesn't make sense.
I really wish that I could be go barefoot everywhere. But interestingly enough, in Costa Rica, once we arrived to Costa Rica, first thing I did, I took off my shoes and then I hit a rock and I'm pretty sure I broke one of my toes.
No.
Then the other trip that we did, I think we were in Texas somewhere and we went to a botanical gardens. Oh yeah, Fort Worth, which by the way, that botanical gardens is incredible. And I took my shoes off and something stung my toe, same toe. And
No.
I was like, why? Why is this happening? And my husband is like, you haven't learned. And I'm like, I don't care. I will break toes. I will get stung by something. I will keep walking barefoot. I love walking barefoot.
So funny.
When I was in Hawaii, I heard one of the tours that we did, the guide shared something that broke my heart. He said that when they were colonizing Hawaii, they threw a bunch of different seeds, or I don't know what it was, like some type of weed in like the beach areas, and that weed grew to be like thorns. And they did that with the intention to get, the native people to wear shoes.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my God. I think I cried when he was sharing that, because to me, the connection that I have with the earth when I'm barefoot is like nothing that I can describe with words. Like I literally, I crave it. Like that's why I'm like, I will break toes, because it feels like I'm supported. Like that is like my lifeline. It's like similar to meditation. Like I need to be barefoot. And to learn that was really heartbreaking. It was really heartbreaking. So I mentioned meditation, and I know this is a practice that you also cultivate in your life and in the way that you facilitate it. Anything that you want to share as we wrap up our conversation about meditation? How do you implement that in your life, in your ceremonies? Why is it important?
Yeah. So I'm trained in Vipassana style meditation, and Vipassana can translate as to see things as they are. So I don't work with mantras or exercises. I practice literally just focusing on my breath and being present with my breath. And so for me, meditation, it's so integratable into whatever I'm doing. I love to meditate with plants as well, which is different than focusing on the breath, because it's really focusing on the energy of the plant. And plant meditations are something that I learned in herbalism school with my teacher, Marisha, with School of the Sacred Wild. She's an amazing plant meditation facilitator. And it really helps to bring in the wisdom of a plant. And you could probably, you can meditate with so many different entities, a crystal, a piece of art, something that's meaningful, that has its own vibration. But with the plants, it's beautiful because they're living. And so when we meditate with plants, we get the consciousness of this other being to help inform, a direction, a point of where we're seeking clarity. And I think meditation is so beautiful because it just really helps to quiet the mind. And there's all of the medicine is in quieting the mind. We can just get our mental state relaxed. Our intuition knows, our inner spirit knows, what is the right thing for us, and it knows how to harmonize. And so much of what we're doing when we're learning these practices is we're remembering these practices. Like we know how to live in alignment with the earth. We were born here. We are from here. We all came from here, And so meditation is such a great tool with helping to reactivate that inner wisdom that is there and just wants to come through.
I have many questions, because when you said I meditate with plants, I'm like, okay, tell me more. I do want to say something before, because I'm also trained in mindfulness, which could be also a synonym of Vipassana. And when I did my training, I remember my teacher saying, mindfulness is the synonym to insight, also synonym to remembering. And what you're saying is this remembrance. Yes, when we're connecting, when we're meditating, when we are able to connect with our thoughts, even when the mind is loud, not necessarily, like it would be amazing if it gets quiet. But even when it's loud, there is a moment when we connect with that, when our attention is with that there's like this remembrance of who we are, why we're doing it, that I really love that you brought that up, because that really is, to me, what meditation has brought me, is this line, kind of, this lifeline to remember. So back to my question of the plants. How are you actually doing that? Are you holding a plant? Are you staring at a plant? Are you praying to the plant? Is that something that maybe you're incorporating? How are you doing that?
There's so many different ways. I think a really accessible way is to make a tea with just one herb. It could be peppermint, it could be lavender, it could be chamomile, oat straw, whatever. Any simple, we call a simple herb blend is just when it's just one herb. It isn't like 20 different herbs in a blend. And drop into ceremony, however, someone defines that, however they would sit in ceremony. And when they make their tea, call in the spirit of that plant. And the way that my teacher likes to say it is, call in the spirit the way you would like an elder that you were meeting for the first time. You would be respectful in reverence and gratitude for this plant. And when you're drinking the plant, know that you're not just drinking the plant, you're also calling in the spirit of that plant. And you're meditating with the spirit of the plant. And you can ask questions. You can just notice how the plant works through the body. You can give a prayer. There's so many different ways to create that connection. And I mean, I'm a Capricorn, I'm a lawyer. I'm like, when I was like plant meditate, like, what is this? Like talking to plants, what is this? I was so like, that's not going to happen for me. I don't think I have that skill. I was mind blown. I was in an oat straw meditation and I had the most beautiful visualization of this plant. All of these messages came through for me. It was one of the most profound experiences of my life. And I had never done that before, And so I would just say, even if you're like listening to this and you're like, what? Meditating with a plant and listening to the spirit of a plant? Like, that sounds so crazy. I was right there too. Like, I did not think it was accessible to me, but it was, because the plants want to help us. Like, even though we have done so much damage to this earth, even though we have created a system that is so out of alignment, they are still rooting for us. They still want us to figure it out. And so if you're like a little bit open and you open that door with them, they will start talking. So it can be anything, but I think just sitting in meditation, drinking the plant in reverence, calling in the spirit, that can bring forth a lot from the plant.
I find it so funny how, funny, and at the same time, it's like, it's interesting that when we find the right language to communicate these concepts with people that perhaps are a little bit more skeptic, it really opens new doors. Because I think about adaptogens all the time, and adaptogens are another word for tea and herbs. They just simply, that word is already saying what they do, which basically every single tea, every single herb has an intention, right? Or it's a medicine. And in a way, I feel like, a lot of us more, used to that very purpose, goal-oriented type of lifestyle, when we hear adaptogens, we're like, oh yeah, I want that. And I'm definitely using it in my diet. But it's technically every tea is that, right?
Yeah.
Am I really far off?
No, I think that's right. I mean, the way I see adaptogen is it's a plant that regulates you. Where if you're feeling really anxious, it brings you down. If you're feeling really depressed, it will bring you up. It's going to bring your body back into homeostasis. And many plants have that quality. And the beautiful thing about adaptogens is you can work with them consistently, you can work with them daily, and they'll just want to bring you into balance, which is amazing. Like that the plant has the intelligence to bring you up or down or this way or that, depending on where you are, is beyond like what we can comprehend. And it just again shows how much the plants want us to be balanced. Like they have the ability to know where we need to recenter and help guide us there. And like want us to feel good, which like, yeah, they're our friends.
I think that as we wrap up, I'm just going to share this because this comes back to what something that you said at the beginning, that you like to use, you know, your local herbs, and that's usually what you go to. I remember hearing someone saying that usually, not usually, that earth, I mean, it's like earth is it's the wisdom, right? It's like the tangible wisdom of like the things that we don't know of and the things that we cannot see. At least that's how I see it. And in cities, usually you would see what we call weeds. Of course, we cannot consume every single plant or every single flower or whatever. But usually some things that we consider weeds are actually medicine for
Yes.
that specific environment.
Yes.
So like, let's say in New York, you will see weeds just popping out of nowhere, a specific weed. And I think that was specifically the example that they gave in New York. And I can remember, it's the yellow plant. I can remember. But they were like, this we consider weeds. And this is actually a plant that helps with our breathing, you know, like with our lungs and like breathing. So it's normal for this type of plant to be in cities that are very contaminated. And I was like, oh,
I love that.
Of course, Earth knows that and is showing us the way. And here we are like, oh, a weed. I do not want to end on that note though, because I do remember seeing something in your Instagram that I resonated so much with. And you mentioned something about humans not being the problem, which takes me back to, I don't know if you've read The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible by Charles Einstein.
No.
So he talks, that's like a Bible for me. Like I love like the work of that person. Is like, I love his work. But he really talks about the importance of the story that we're telling about ourselves and the story of everything. But specifically, this brings me back to what I heard you say, which is humans are not the problem. What do you mean by that?
I think it's really easy to look at our climate crisis and our cities and our systems and all of these things and have the reaction of like, wow, humans just need to get out of the way and let nature do its thing. And if we weren't here, like everything would be fine. And I empathize with that narrative because I also struggle to make sense of what humans have done to this earth and to each other. And we belong here. And I think it's really important that we understand that because it means that we're responsible. It really requires us to take responsibility and to sit and look at ourselves and say, okay, if we really belong here, what does a human that belongs here live like? Like, what does that life entail? And it really empowers us to be our true nature, to be in harmony with our environment, and to really do what only humans can do. Like, we can create art and give offerings of song back to the land. And there's so many things that we're capable of doing that are unique to the human experience. And not that we're the only beings that sing, but you know what I mean? We have gifts as humans, and we can activate those gifts, and we can share that with each other and with the world. And I think that when we remember that we belong here, and it prevents us from bypassing and just being like, okay, like we need to just step aside and make ourselves small. It's like, no, let's take up space, but let's take up space that's in harmony with the earth and with each other. And for me, what that looks like, and it sounds similar to you, is like opening the heart. Like if we can really live from our heart, I am so confident that we will live in a way that's in alignment with everything around us. And we all have our own unique mission in like bringing forth that vision. And I think that there's a responsibility, but there's also a joy in accepting that we belong here and being the medicine beings that we are, and just having that experience. And I think that for me, it took a minute to accept that because I was so discouraged by what I was seeing. But when I really embraced this sense of belonging and resonance and harmony, I feel so capable. Like I really have so much faith and trust that I will be able to live in harmony with the earth and offer something that's meaningful.
I love that. I love that, and I resonate with that so much, which is why I said I don't really want to end that on that note, saying like, of course we are, because I also feel in my heart what you're saying, that if in some way or in so many ways we have created this, then we also have the capacity to turn around and to really use our gifts and really be led by the heart in the ways in which we can really regenerate, and we can then create a more harmonious world and a more beautiful world.
Yeah.
So where can people find you? Is there anything that you want to share with people that you're doing? You did mention your retreat.
Yeah.
Anything else that you want to share?
Yeah. Well, I mean, my Instagram is at Her Heart Practice. My website is herheartpractice.com. I have a retreat coming up at the end of July, a women's retreat, a wisdom women's retreat. We're going to be making medicine, yoga, qigong, meditation, river swimming. It's going to be really nourishing and restorative. And then I also do offer one-on-one sessions for people who want mentorship on integrating these medicines into their daily lives. I've been offer ceremonies, cacao ceremonies, plant medicine ceremonies. I don't have any upcoming ceremonies right now, but I can also do one-on-one or private ceremonies, and all of that's on my website. So yeah, lots of different offerings.
I wish you all the best in this new
you.
season. I've said this before in some of the conversations, and following the heart is usually not the easiest path. It's actually one that is very, could stretch us a lot. So I know you're following your heart, taking this leap of faith and really listening to it and leaving behind this chapter. But, anything that you need, I'm here. If there's any way I can help.
You're so sweet.
And I just wish you all the best, lots of strength in this process, because I know, emotions can go up and down, a lot of resilience in that process. And thank you so much for gifting us your time, your wisdom, your energy in this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. This is such a beautiful project that you're working on. I loved being a part of it.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Camille. I'm definitely taking many tips and practices that I'm going to start implementing in my day-to-day life. And if you find that anything from this podcast could be beneficial to anyone you know, please share this podcast. Let me know in the comments what you thought about this conversation, any questions that you have, and if maybe you feel inspired to suggest what type of conversations you would want to hear here. I would love to hear from you. I hope I will see you next week.